So today we're really excited to have speaker, author, Courage Award winner, mentor, parent, and autism and trauma self-advocate, Sondra Williams, to be our guest on Wonderful Works Talks. Sondra, we are so excited for you to be here. Welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm really honored to be here as well. I love the opportunities when I get a chance to do work in faith. I think it's a need that absolutely needs to be addressed. And, you know, just sharing not too long ago on one of the pages that I am on Facebook, one of the moms said I brought too much faith and too much God talks into the conversations. And I thought, well, if that's as bad as you think I'm going to get, then I'm happy because I'm doing what I'm doing.
Well, I have heard you speak before, and I know you are a powerful speaker. God is going to help use you to further his kingdom and to help people with autism and trauma. And we are so excited that you're talking to us today because, as you mentioned, we also love to talk about God and think faith is important for all people. And today, this is for everyone to watch, but a lot of our audience will be church ministry leaders. And so we are going to really take a look at your life experience and what people in the church world can learn from you to see how we can serve students and people with autism better in the church. You had mentioned in a previous podcast that you were on that when you were young, communicating with others was very challenging. Can you describe what that was like?
Well, I remember as a child, like, for example, just starting to learn words. I remember very young, before words were even understood or had any meaning to me, that the sounds would come in and it would be like glitter just floating in the air. But it never made any sense to me. The first sound that ever made sense, believe it or not, was my mother opening a bottle of soda and I heard the fizz. I was watching what she was doing, but I heard the fizz. And that fizz always meant to me soda. So I could hear that fizz. If I was in the bedroom and heard the fizz, I'd come running because I always wanted that soda. And to this day, that is still the main thing, whether it's good or bad for my health, is the one thing I go to as a self-regulating tool. So if I'm having to go to work, I reward myself with soda before I leave and go head off to work. If I have to go to the grocery store, I'm running straight to McDonald's and getting that Diet Coke so I can manage what I have to do with my reward system at hand so that I can get through whatever it is I have to get through. And then as words started to form for me, it was very difficult. For like example too, they have a commercial that's been out a couple years back, and it was about cheese, and they would call it Zip It because it was in like a Zip It bag or a Ziploc bag. I kept hearing the phrase zip it, zip it. So as a child, if I was watching that and saw cheese and kept hearing the word zip it, I would have made the assumption that cheese was called a Zip It. So if I was asking for a Zip It, people wouldn't have a clue what I was asking for, and they would get frustrated with me to where I was now frustrated and on the floor screaming and crying and in a full meltdown. Because I thought it's so simple. Why can't they understand it's cheese is what my brain was saying, but I thought cheese was called Zip It. So those kinds of things were very difficult for me as a child. And anxiety was so crippling that when thoughts did form in my head and I tried to get them out, what happened was the anxiety would shut it down. And then it would shut that channel off. And so most of the time I didn't talk. I was very introverted, very quiet. Most people thought they didn't realize I was autistic. They thought I was extremely shy to the maximum levels. And it wasn't that at all. It was me trying to avoid anybody having conversation with me because I didn't. And at school, it caused a lot of problems because if somebody brought something in interesting to play with during recess time, if I wanted to play with it, I didn't have the words to ask. So I would just go and take it. And then it would cause this rumbling in the classroom, and I had no idea why they were upset with it, because I just wanted to play with it too. And I didn't know in the girl's clown doll was going to cause a big fuss in the classroom.
Right. So if I'm understanding correctly, Sondra, what you're saying is when you were very young, sounds were confusing to you because you actually saw like glitter when you heard things. That's my understanding. Is that called synesthesia?
It could have been. I had no idea what it was called back then, but I do remember the room. I could see glitter just floating out of people's mouths whenever they spoke. It wasn't sound. It was blip.
Yeah.
So it's very possible that it could be what you just described. I'm not well at being able to say that word. I have certain words I can't say.
Yeah.
It's off on it, but I know what that word means.
Yeah.
And so I also had those very similar things around emotions.
Yeah.
I would see color swirls around emotions. I don't do that as much anymore. So I don't know whatever happened to that or caused that to go away. But I don't have that as much anymore.
Yeah. And just so we can explain to our viewers, my understanding of synesthesia is that it's kind of a crossing of your senses in your brain, that you may get the stimuli from one sense, but your brain interprets it along with a different sense. My mother actually has this. That's how I know about it. She sees different colors when she hears certain words. So that would be confusing if other people aren't experiencing that, but that's how you are experiencing sounds. And then you said you started learning words, but there was still some more confusion on that because we don't always use words the way that they're meant to be used, and having to figure out those assumptions, interpret that can be confusing.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Very, very much so. And the literal interpretation of things. That's when typical people speak. They don't realize how abstract sometimes their ideas or thoughts are open-ended, and it doesn't make sense. Even as a young adult, I remember attending the church, and the pastor came out and he said he was in a long phone conversation with God all weekend. My brain instantly thought, I need to know the number of God. I want to talk to him too.
Yeah, me too.
And he really wasn't on the phone with God, but my brain thought that. And I thought, oh, how amazing. He knows the number to God. I want to talk to that guy, And then I was talking to my friend about it, and she explained it to me, that it's just like a metaphor. He really wasn't on a phone to God. But that prayer can be like a phone to God. So, and I still get snagged up on those. A lot of times people have had to teach me. And, the other things that people at the church can be doing is when I was in the sanctuary and the pastor was preaching at the time, they haven't been doing it lately since I've been coming back to Vineyard, but they used to have like the questions. They would have a little pamphlet that you would get when you first come in, and it would talk about talking points. And so when the pastor was talking and preaching about those things, you could fill in the blanks, because they would talk about those and fill in the blanks up there on the sanctuary, but you'd see it on a big screen. And that visual support was so important to me. A lot of times I'm playing on my iPad, sorting cards, which helps me deal with the crowd and the anxiety, because it's like a mega church. But people think that I'm not paying attention. But I can guarantee you that if you look at my paper at the end of the service, I paid attention and all my blanks are filled, and I understood what was being said. So I do different things to help me be in the sanctuary. Sometimes it's head, sometimes it's my iPad, other things like that, just to help me with dealing with those things. And in the church, people will say, oh, well, if you go to so-and-so and you ask this, and they'll tell you, you go over to this department. Sometimes by the time they gave me all those directions, I'm already lost and I won't even follow through because I don't know where to begin. So sometimes we need that model or assist, someone just to walk us through it, take us through it. Let us do it a couple of times. And then once we've got it, then we've got it. Like signing my daughter into the classes for students for the protection, you had to sign them in. But that was really difficult for me each time. My daughter got it better than I did. And she would say, just type in her phone number, Mama, and it'll bring it up, But she would through it. And she's the one with the traumatic brain injury, and she's helping Mama figure out how to sign her in.
So you just mentioned a whole lot of things that I think are really important that ministry leaders really unpack. So let's go back a little bit. You had said, as you were learning language, that it was stressful for you, that because you didn't always know how to communicate the way everyone else did, that caused a lot of anxiety. And sometimes you would act out or withdraw in reaction to that. I think that's very common with a lot with everyone really, but with a lot of students with autism. So for ministry leaders, if they have a student with autism who is acting out or seems like they're withdrawing, what do you think is one thing they can do to help that child?
I think that the strongest thing for them is some visual supports. We're going to start out with this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, and check things off as we go. If there's going to be a change and you're not quite sure what the change is, just put a question mark in that spot so that the child even knows that even the teacher's not quite sure what's going to be put into that spot, but something's going to happen there. And then also discuss, if things change or something happens that we need to change the schedule, it's okay because we can come right back to where we left off. We can go back to the schedule if we have time. Those kinds of things are important to our students.
Right.
Also being able to know how to take a break. Being allowed to fidget at the table if we need a fidget thing. Some people say, oh, no, take that away. He needs to pay attention. Sometimes we're using the tools that will help us pay attention. Some of our students even need to just pace around the room while they're listening to what's going on. Some of the teachers will try to encourage them to sit, and that's sometimes the wrong thing. If that person needs movement to be able to grasp the words, to help them let it flow or process, then that's what they actually need. If they're being disruptive and walking around the room destroying things, then another technique needs to happen. But if they're walking around the room or standing, just let them stand. When I taught classes at the Learning Spectrum, I taught through autistic perspective. And I would tell the kids when they first walked in, I said, this is a safe zone for autistics. So if you need to flap, you flap. If you need to lay on the floor or sit on the floor, you do what you need to do. And the kids loved it. They're like, what? They're looking at each other like, we can be ourselves in this room. And the kids just loved it. It was the first time they had the freedom to be who they were and weren't going to be judged or told to stop doing that, because I feel that that's a disservice that we do a lot with autistic individuals is we try to make them normal, act like everybody else. And to some degree, yes, we do need to do that. But to some degree, we're also who we are and we need to be who we are, know.
Can you express to the people watching what the difference is when someone lets you be yourself or gives you the interventions that you need? Say they give you the visual supports, they go through the checklist. What is the difference in your anxiety level before and after getting those interventions?
I think it reduces my anxiety because I know what to expect, what's going to happen. I'm one that also likes to sit in the same place every single time because it helps me orientate to the room. Some changes in the room can distort and throw me off. So sometimes it's good to talk about that before I enter the room. Hey, Sondra, we moved the tables around. Things are going to be a little different in the classroom today, but we still have your same chair in the same spot at a table, but it's just moved into a different spot. Like the table itself is moved, but the orientation to that table is the same for you. Those kinds of things are helpful to me. Sometimes I would walk in and that wasn't done and I would kind of freeze up at the door. My anxiety would get high. Sometimes I would turn around and walk out. Sometimes I've even left church services because things like that happened and I didn't have the ability to communicate because I just froze up in my space. It's not happened very often because I love church. So I sometimes figure out what's my backup plan. And that's what I've always learned to do now. I'm going to go to church, step one. I'm going to go to church and I'm going to get my soda before I go to church, step two. And then step three is I'm at the church. If things go wrong, I can do this as a backup plan or I can leave. So I have backup plans now and I do, it's what I call, we always know problem solving A, but I now add B and C in there. So B and C is my backup plans. And if A doesn't work, I can do B or C. And if my anxiety is too high and I can't do B and C, I can leave, So that allows me to have the choice and the control of what's going to happen or how I'm going to manage it. For some of our students, I know they can't leave, so they tend to bolt. They're like, I'm going to and really what they're doing is regulating themselves by bolting, even though it's a danger and a threat. The other big part of looking at the communication is oftentimes that anxiety is the big cursor to causing our communication to shut down. So even if we're very, very verbal, it's still good to have visual support in the room that I need, and then have multiple choices below that we can just simply point to or put a block on. I'd like to read a poem that I wrote on communication. I hear the laughter of poetic sounds tickling in my head, the dancing words that are friends with me but are often left unsaid. Yet the dancing words flow out of me in rhythmic song, saying the things I dwell upon, but have been stuck for way too long. It's a mighty war within me that does not let me express in verbal sound. Yet within my thinking, words dance and sing in ways that circle round. Words that struggle and fight when attempted to be verbally spoken. So they come expressively dancing in a new form of token. Not easily understood by others how this can be, for they see a person different than the real of me. For inside my thinking is deep and profound. Hearing spoken words to me are more than just mere sounds. They dance, they sing and waltz in the inner me. With the inner me, it is a special dance that others are not able to see. For the dancing words are unique and rare for others to know. They are my deepest reflections of what's trapped in my soul. Another thing to share is that on the film Wretches and Jabbers, it's about two adult males who are nonverbal, non-speaking, but they're typers. That's why they're called wretches and jabbers, people who talk, people who are like poor in conversation or communication. And one of the gentlemen would always say, "Larry, a bad boy, Larry, a bad boy." And they thought that maybe it was a script that he heard people saying to him in the past, and that it was things that maybe, was negative towards him, and that he just always remembers. So when anxiety comes up, he was echoing it back. But when they asked him about it, he typed out, he said, no, he says, what happens is what I want to say is in the forefront of my brain, but it gets pushed out of the way and other words jump in its place. And it's not words that I want to say, but that's what comes out of my mouth. So a lot of times it's very complex for individuals with autism, because they may say scripted things, they may say echoed things, or they may be trying to say something, but instead other words keep coming out. So it's so complex to determine how to understand how is that person communicating.
Right.
And the best way I say is time. Time and experience with the individual will help you understand where those things are coming from, whether it's echoed or it's, something scripted, something that somebody's taught him to say. There's certain things that also are trigger words that people may say that might trigger a person because of traumatic experiences for school. One student, I forget the phrase, so I'll come up with the phrase. It's like, no, do this first. Let's say that was the phrase. He always interpreted that as there was going to be aggressive behavior behind it. So whenever that he immediately would go into a meltdown rage, tear up the paper, push his chair back. He was trying to escape to get away from you. And again, those time and experiences. Once you learn what not to say as trigger words, you'll learn how to say it differently so that you help the student.
So some things that might be good for ministry leaders to know would be that sometimes what someone is saying is not what they actually want to say. Paying attention to nonverbal cues from the student.
Yeah, and some of our kids may sign, and some of those signs might be idiosyncratic. They might be very different. So if we knew how they sign and what those signs mean, is really important. Even if you video the child doing those signs and share that video with the instructors of the class or whoever's going to be ministering to them, so they begin to understand. If some of our kids come in with communication boards and or something, ask for some training so that you know how, because some of our kids are smart and will turn it off so that you want them to communicate with you. And they're like, I can't, my board's not. And our kids are smart. They're very smart. And so they'll do what they need to do. But some of our kids, they really want to try. And I was in a class observing at a church one time, and a young man had a PEX system. And he wanted to paint. And of course, he was walking over by where the kids were painting, and he was just flapping his hand like this over the paint, and then he'd walk away, and then he'd come back and he'd flap again over the paint. And I said, he wants to paint. So they let him paint for a little bit. And when he was done, he signed finished. Just finished. And he got up and I let him go. And she goes, oh, no. He has to come back and he has to point to this on the board to tell me he's finished. I said, he signed finished. And it's like, I was trying to be very polite and respectful. But at the same time, what we want out of our individuals is unprompted, independent communication. And that's what he did. I didn't want him to say finished. He signed finished and he got up and left.
Yeah.
He should have had to be made to come to sit back down and point out on the board. So we need to watch those things and how we're addressing those communication boards. Yes, he has one, but watch, because some of our kids might sign instead of use the board. I've noticed this a lot with some of our younger kids, is that when they want to do something, they literally will walk over to the area or place and kind of rock, or they'll flap a little bit over the item. It's almost like saying, I want to do this thing here, but I don't know what the words are, I don't have the words. And so you need to watch for those kinds of things, because our kids are actually asking, I want to play with it, I want to understand this. And we just ignore it. We just think it's an autistic thing that they're standing there flapping.
Right. So pay attention, watch those nonverbal cues, and look for patterns. If someone always goes to the same area, they probably want something there, right?
Yes.
You hit on something I want to kind of dive a little bit deeper into, and that is that sometimes people with autism may not be able to communicate how they feel on the inside on the outside. And I think sometimes people misinterpret this as that the person isn't really deeply feeling something, or isn't paying attention or connecting. Can you tell us what that's really like?
Well, for most autistics, not all, but the most that I have talked to and know about, it's not that we don't feel, it's that we overly feel everything. We feel everything to the point that it sometimes overloads us and shuts us down, and we don't know how to respond or react to it. Our face is not the indicator of telling you what our emotional states are. Most often it will be the flapping or the vocal sounds. Like some of our kids will have deep throaty voices, and you can tell it's an agitated sound. They're agitated about something. Some of our kids will have almost that panicky kind of verbal sounds coming out without it being actual words. And some of our kids are so flappy, stimmy, jumping all over because they're extremely happy about what's going on in the room. And to dispel some of this myth is, I was at a speaking event years back, and a mother had shared, and she wanted to ask that same question. Is it possible that my son really was feeling? But she had two sons, and one of her sons was terminally ill, and the other son was severely impacted by autism and non-speaking. And the one son had passed away, and a few months later was that son's birthday. Well, the autistic child didn't know how to communicate to his mother, but he saw his brother's picture on the mantle of the fireplace. He picked it off the mantle, he took it, he flapped it around his mother and dropped it in her lap, and it was a picture of her son who had passed. But it was his birthday, and he was saying, I know it's his birthday, but where is he? Kind of a thought.
Right.
That made her realize that not only did he acknowledge and understand that he had a brother that's no longer there, but he also even knew his birth date. And he was aware of the days and the months and whatever in the year, where she thought maybe that wasn't possible because he's not speaking and he's not showing us anything that of what he knows. But she said that was powerfully impacting to her, to let her know that he is fully aware of so much more than what she ever thought. And I see that over and over. Another mom had shared her daughter, who also was non-speaking, was watching, and her mother was crying and wasn't feeling well. And the daughter didn't know what to do, so she went and got the box of tissues and brought it and dropped it in beside her mom on the bed. It was her way of saying, I don't really know how to fix this, but I see you're crying and I know you need a tissue. She was trying to be empathetic and sympathetic to her mother, which a lot of the old literature shares, autistics aren't supposed to have that, which is a total myth and a total lie. We are so full of it, but we just don't know what to do with it all the time or how to effectively respond. I call them sponge people. I'm a sponge people, and I get too much emotions of other people in there, and sometimes it just pours off of me. And I can feel the torment in the souls of those with mental health issues or those that are in severe traumatic experiences. I cry over those things as if it's happening to me. The impact is so deep and so strong. I feel that that's a God-given gift. And sometimes it feels like a curse, but it's really a gift because it allows me to know how to pray and how to think about the world differently. But it produces a lot of anxiety because I'm so in tune to that spiritual side, emotional side of people that, I can just be watching a simple TV show and just to start sobbing my eyes out because of what's happening,
So I think for ministry leaders, a couple things. One is I think we should always assume competence, even if a student is nonverbal or is not able to communicate the way they want to. We assume that they're learning. And so I think that's really important when we are pouring in the Bible and we are trying to reach them with their faith, that we do that the same way we would do, maybe use adapted curriculum, but you're still pouring it in the same way you would do with anyone else in the class, because God can help them learn what they need to learn. And a lot of times they're taking in a lot more than they can show. Do you think that is true?
Yeah. And like I said, typical people, they look at each other's face and can pick up signals and signs of emotional state. Autistics aren't very good at that. Although we can see the very subtle differences and changes, what we feel is the positive or negative energies from people. So we know right away whether you really like us or you don't like us. And if you don't like us or you're having anxiety about us because you don't really understand us or get us, we're going to feel that impact so deeply that we may try to avoid you or avoid that class or avoid that situation because we feel like that we're not understood and that we're not liked. So that's really hard because even if you try to fake it, we still know it. And those are called complex people. So when you're saying one thing, but your body is telling us something totally different, those completely confusing kinds of people causes us anxiety, and we try to avoid them for those reasons, because it's like you don't match up. And like they say that we can't read or we don't. We overly read and we overly feel. To a major level. And some of those may even look totally oblivious, as if we're not aware of anything going on in the room. But then if they're a typer, you type and ask them, they can tell you about religion and about housing and about how they think about their future. They are so fully aware.
Right. So the best thing that ministry leaders can do would be approach people with kindness, compassion, calmness, and keep pouring in.
Yes. Yeah. And, they always tell us about self-regulating. Everybody always says, calm your body. But if your body is not calm, we can't calm. If you're in control, not like bossy control, but if you're in control in a calm state, we feel in control in a calm state. But if you're escalated, we're going to escalate. We may not know what's escalating, but we realize and pick up the energy that something's not matching up and our anxiety will go high. So we always say, if you can't regulate yourself, your class is not going to be regulated either.
Speaking of self-regulating, I know a lot of people with autism experience sensory overload fairly easily.
Yes.
Can you explain from your perspective what that actually feels like?
Well, I think I'd like to start with a poem.
Okay, great.
Because a lot of people have asked me to read this poem at conferences because they feel like it's very powerfully impacting what it feels like to be overloaded by the sensory bombardment. And I called it fragmented because that's exactly what it is. It's our sensory overloads and everything become fragmented. And so we can't make sense of a lot of stuff. Words spoken, echoing, bouncing, trying hard to focus, but feeling lost. Instead, my attention drifts off forever, internally distracted. I enter a room, unwelcome changes. My systems freeze, numb with fear. Wanting to bolt as the fear is too intense, but frozen I wait. Movements, confusion like a maze, bumping, no defined rules. Anxiety builds, needing all to be calm, set in its place, yet no control. Human touch, meant to be gentle, yet causes deep unforeseen pain, needing to always be on guard, watching and waiting. Sounds pierce my being, rip my inner soul, tormenting me, avoiding, pacing, forcing the sounds to diminish, not letting life to penetrate. Smells intensified, creating patterns, imprinting emotional connections, causing internal surges of fear alternated with safe, developed from exposure. Craving emerged, need for textures, routine, patterns for eating, need to settle this urgency to consume the craving within, but frustrated with no access. Feeling out of sync, not in rhythm, searching for calm, pursuing deep pressure, need for comfort, self-centering, acting out, appearing bad, attempting to set balance. Lacking of intuitive interferes with function, creates a barrier. Simple, intellectual, literal, feeling but lack in timing, expressing with no regards, forward and blunt with no intent. Playing in the midst of patterns, looking, searching for symmetrical, lining up with pleasure, hoarding, absorbing, organizing, pretending, the child within. Wanting comfort, pounding computer keys, walking among the trees, dark pools, seeking the calm, listening and watching the waves come to shore, but not among people. Actively moving, not letting life to consume me, wanting purpose, dreaming for life as others, seeking unity and dignity, challenged, different, autistic, fragmented, and seeking. And that kind of sums up all the sensory parts of our body and just how it feels to be autistic with some of those things, like, with the sounds just in a room, they bounce off the walls and it can become overloaded if too many people are talking at once. Mm-hmm. And so it may not be the sound level itself, but the confusion of all the voices blended in. To me, sometimes like a hive of bees right beside my head buzzing.
Yeah.
So
I think it's really important. So my brother has autism, and there's a lot of different autistic traits within probably everyone in the family. I have sensory overload issues. So one thing, I know what that feels like, and I feel like the average person doesn't get it. But would you agree, for me, when I feel like my sensory system's been overloaded, it feels like I go into the fight or flight or fright response. I go into a trauma response. Like either I completely shut down, or I feel angry for absolutely no reason, or I run.
Polyvagal. There's a polyvagal nervous system, and it still triggers that, which we see in trauma, but we also see in many autistics. And because of our experiences as autistics, we also, the way people respond and react to us have also triggered the trauma responses. So you're right. Yes, I either fight, flight, or freeze, or I shut down completely. So I withdraw, I shut down, or I'm actively engaged in trying to be like, I don't know, like walking for miles to try to walk off. I respond to it differently, but it depends on where my mental and emotional state's at. That it's so overwhelming. It's like taking too much cough medicine and your body's jumping all over and you can't get rid of that sensation. Yeah. But it's even more intensified than that.
Yeah, that's what I really want people to understand, that this is not someone isn't trying hard enough to acclimate to their environment. They can't. It is like at a core level, it is kind of taking control of how you are in the world. And so it's really important, that sensory piece is really important to be aware of, and to have an outlet. If you can't make the environment less chaotic or loud or smelly, then that you have a place where someone can go where it's calmer.
Yeah, some of the churches I've been seeing, and I'm really proud and pleased of this, are creating sensory rooms where with autism can be taken for a break if they need to, where they have like netted swings or just a beanbag crash pad, or soft lighted things that help them calm and regulate to themselves. You can create some of those things even within the classroom. At church, some of the things you do in a classroom for school, you could actually do in a church. Like netted swings can fit in door jambs, door frames in between a room or a section. So an individual can be sitting there listening to instruction instead of being at the table where they're not able to sit and focus. Put them where they're sensory best regulated.
Right. And then once you get your sensory system back regulated, a lot of times people can rejoin the environment. But that is just really important. And we just really want people to understand what that feels like and how you can help. Because otherwise, if you don't help someone, then it just keeps building until a lot of times they might melt down or they withdraw completely.
Yeah. And the important things about is catching it before it happens. So when you start the mild escalating kinds of things, that's where you intervene. You don't wait until they're screaming before you intervene. Right. And when they do come back and they are re-regulated and back to the classroom, reduce their stresses. Don't put demands on them like, can you read chapter, verse this or verse that. Don't put those demands on them. Just let them sit in the classroom, even if it's sitting on the floor in a beanbag across the room. That's where they want to be. Let them be. Include them when they feel like that they can be inclusive. And it's not like you're actively ignoring them. You're giving them their space. Some people think, well, I feel like I'm just ignoring him and I'm giving everybody else instructions and I'm ignoring him. But no, you're allowing this person to learn from the safety net that they need at that moment. So, but if you were as a teacher, which I wouldn't assume that happened in a church, but if you just pulled him aside and put him over there and said, I'm going to teach everybody else and I know you don't like it, so I'm going to put you over there. That's different. That's a form of exclusion. But if the student puts themselves in that situation where they want to sit there when they come back in the room, allow it. As long as it's disruptive, allow them to be calm and however they need.
Yes. I
and
agree
you don't
100%.
Yeah. And you don't want to keep bombarding them with questions like, do you want the weighted blanket? Do you want this? Do you want that? No, if you know that he likes weighted blanket, just take it over and sit it on the floor beside him. If he wants it, he'll pick it up. If he doesn't, at least it's there. You don't have to say any words to him. Just smile there and walk away. To be people, once we're calm enough, let's go ahead and start re-engaging them in conversation. And that's the worst thing you can do.
Yeah. I would just add to that. I agree with that 100%. I would just add to that, when you are teaching a child who has autism, who you notice maybe shutting down, oftentimes I see people try to then get closer into their face, get their voices louder, make their bodies bigger to try to get engagement. This is actually the opposite of what is helpful. So if you see someone is shutting down, that might be a sign that they are feeling overloaded. So respect that and give them their space to process the world at their pace.
Yeah.
So Sondra, we also have a lot of families who'll be watching this today. I know you are a mother of 4 children on the autism spectrum, and you are a grandmother. What is something you would tell a parent who maybe their child has a new diagnosis?
For the new diagnosis, one of the things I had wrote down as a talking point was that it's a journey. Mm-hmm. It's a journey that you don't know where it's going to end up. It's like being on a boat. You're out to sea with a lot of people on the boat, but you don't really know where the boat's going to land. So, you know that you paid a lot of money, you invested in this, and you're going on a big trip. It's just a journey. So you can make the best of it or you can make the worst of it. And sometimes our kiddos are really, really difficult. They have a lot of challenges. But some of our kids are like a mixed bag of jelly beans. Some of us hate the black licorice jelly bean, but some bags have more of that black licorice jelly beans in their bag compared to your favorite, which might be orange, and the next bag has full of orange. So some of our kids are like that. Sometimes you get a kid with a lot of black licorice, and sometimes you get a kid with a lot of orange. So you can't compare the two because they're very different kiddos in the way that their autism is processing and how they, are managing to work through their autism. I feel like for the kiddos, and I don't mean it in a negative way, the black licorice just means there's a lot of traits and characteristics that are challenging, that causes a lot of stress in people. Some of those new parents are so overwhelmed, they're depressed, they're feeling huge amounts of guilt. Like, did I do something wrong? Did I, cause my baby to be born this way? Is my baby going to have a future? There's all these shattered dreams. So it's not just the individual with autism we want to support, it's how do we support this mom and dad who are going through a traumatic trauma experience with not knowing what the future holds for their child. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So the other part I wrote down there is oftentimes for young parents that have got the newly diagnosed is what you see now isn't oftentimes going to be what you see in 5 years from now or 10 years from now or 20 years from now. I am a very different person than I was when I was 4 and when I was 10 compared to where I am now. I didn't start making a lot of my gains until I was in my 30s before I started to put things together. And it was like doing this jigsaw puzzle for all these years and finally putting in enough pieces that I can figure out what the picture is. That's what it felt like for me, is just baby steps. Yeah. But for some of our individuals, they didn't speak till they were 15. One lady didn't type out her first sentence till she was in her 30s. The first thing she typed to her mom is, don't feed me Salisbury steak, I hate it. I used to fix the Salisbury steak thinking she liked it, but she actually hated it. Yeah. And another one typed out to her dad when they realized that she was fully functional inside. She typed out, how old do I have to be before I can date a boy? She was 14, so she's typical teen thinking about boys. Yeah. They never even knew she was aware of boys, let alone date a boy. Wow. So our kids, it's just like an illusion. What you think you're seeing isn't really what's happening. So for parents, it's just a journey, and it's going to be a lot of ups and downs. It's going to be a lot of rewards and a lot of challenges, but the more you invest, the more often the better the outcome for your child. And sometimes what I mean by the outcome for the child doesn't always mean that they're driving or having a job. Sometimes it means they just learn to regulate and they're more calm in their space. Sometimes they've learned to say 5 or 10 words to communicate, but they're still a calmer person. So, we just have to, as church family, we have to be there for these families who are so hurt at the moment and crushed and have no idea where this boat is taking them.
I know your faith is important to you. How can churches become more inclusive for other families?
My faith is extremely, extremely important to me, but my faith is what got me through a lot. I still have meltdowns. I still have panic attacks. I still have anxiety. I still have depression. But what I found is, and I know I'm supposed to be supporting and helping the churches, but there's a lot of churches that instead of supporting and help, they actually defeat the person even worse. Sometimes it is through misinterpretations and getting stuck on certain scriptures that they try to force upon you. Like, if I'm really stressed or worried, I'll get scriptures like, God has come to set us free and we're not supposed to worry and whatever. And I'm thinking, well, if God didn't want us to worry, he wouldn't have installed those emotions within us. We have worry for a reason. Doesn't mean that we're supposed to go around worrying. It just means that I'm being a human being who has worry at the moment. And once I get through some of the worrying and the panicky states of things, then I'm able to calm my body. And when I regulate it, that's when I know I can go to God. And it's not because I know I should go to God first. It's just my autistic responses to the overwhelming emotion consumes me at the moment. And I get afraid and I, start to worry and shut down or panic and sometimes go into crisis situations. But God is the one that's kept me through it. But I want to read a very small poem. It says, "For me, God is more than words written in pages of books. He is more than a comfort to me. He is the very essence of my being. He is the calm of my storm. He is the artwork of my soul. He is the beauty that surrounds me. He is the music that causes me to dance in life. He is many things, but most of all, he is my Father, and I am his child. A forever bond." And that's the way I look at it. Christians aren't perfect. We're going to make a lot of mistakes as Christians. Even pastors are going to make a lot of mistakes. But do we own up to it at the end of the day? Do we ask God to help us in those areas? Are we working on those things? Because again, just like autism is a journey, our Christian walk is a journey every day. And we have choices. We can choose to do the journey with a positive attitude or a negative attitude. And so it all boils down to those two things. Am I going to be positive or am I going to be negative today?
Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, you are a beautiful poet, by the way. Your poetry is amazing. I'm so excited you're sharing that today.
And the last question I know that you were going to ask was, why is it important for the church to open up?
Yes.
And it's not just for those with disabilities. It's for those with mental health as well. So I'm going to finalize it up with another very short poem. It's called "The Shattered Children." I feel the dampness in the cold, crisp air. Inside, the storm is coming to leave me in despair. I see the place of torment approaching in my vision, life's way of separating the lost souls to their prison. Some carry a pain so deep, yet hidden from view, numb inside, yet fighting for dignity from me and from you, ignoring the intense needs expressed in aggressive anger, saying those with mental illness is of unpredictable danger, when in truth they are shattered children of our ignorance. Ignored and rejected is all they know. They take their stance, fighting back, screaming their pain. Who will reach in? Who will take the chance to genuinely love them and let them begin? Love is the substance that can heal any wound of the soul. Christians, where are you? Where is your goal? Is it to reach the lost or gains of your own self-worth? God sent his son for all, including the lost that dwell on this earth. And that's the reason why I think it's important, because there are so many hurting people. And how often do we reject somebody of schizophrenia in our church who may be acting out or sitting in their chair, turning around backwards, kind of and just watching everybody, kind of like freaking people out. But yet, how deep is his pain? How much does he want to connect? And we're just pushing it aside like we don't really want him in our church. You know, how often do we do that to families of children with autism who constantly are melting down or screaming? We're like, oh, we can't have that in the church. You know, how do we address that as a church family? How do we begin to say, you know, our doors are to be open for all, like Christ said? My love isn't for, you know, just who I want to love. God says love is love. And he says we are to love our neighbor as ourselves. They didn't say unless they're disabled, autistic, mentally ill, gay, lesbian, whatever. He doesn't say that we're supposed to love it except for exclusions of these groups of people. He just says we're to love our neighbor as ourselves. And every day we need to be working on that. Are we truly loving our neighbors as we would want somebody to love us or show that same kind of kindness? So I think that's why it's important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I agree. I think that it is important that the church is welcoming, and that even when things are challenging, it's worth the conversation to figure out next steps to help people and support them, so that we can all start coming together and hearing more about Christ's love.
Yeah, and we just need to remove the barriers, not just the physical, you know, not making sure that we just have wheelchair ramps. You know, those are nice, those are needed. That's removing one barrier. But let's figure out how do we remove the barriers within the church so that everybody has access. Right. And that's the important thing. And I really am so glad and honored that I got this opportunity to have this conversation with you today.
Well, we are glad and honored that you came to speak to us. You have shared so many impactful things. I can't wait for people to see this interview. I think it's going to be changing for a lot of churches. So, Sondra, thank you so much for sharing your time with us today.
Yeah, thank you.